Good evening, Tallowood. If we haven't met before, my name is Joao Moraes, and I was the pastoral intern here at Tallowood this summer, and it's a joy to be back here. I really enjoyed learning from Dr. Brooks and from all of our staff members. And even before I left, Naveen already invited me to be here at this service. And I can tell you how excited I am about this because since the conception of this service, it became clear to me that Tallowood together would be our monthly reminder to keep love growing. Now you may ask, why do we need a reminder to keep love growing? Growth seems like a positive word, almost what we call nowadays a buzzword, right? Something that we are all striving for at all times. Why would we need a reminder? Well, reality is that we don't always want things to grow. Sometimes we want to keep things small, comfortable, cozy. Think about your favorite restaurant or coffee shop, and then people start showing up, and you're like, "Ooh, this is starting to grow. I don't really feel comfortable anymore." Or perhaps your closest group of friends, and then an outsider starts coming in, and you start to feel a little uncomfortable. I remember my first semester of college, and I got invited to come to this meeting of the Brazilian Student Association. And when I got there, I realized that the meeting was a soccer watch party. We were watching the Brazilian national team on TV and drinking soda. Awesome. And I loved the Brazilian Student Association because I thought it would be a place for me to relax, a place for me to kick back and just be myself, speak some Portuguese, talk to someone about what's going on in my country. By the way, I'm from Brazil, if you didn't know that. So I liked it so much that I accepted to become the vice president of the organization. Note, if you work with college students, never let a freshman become the vice president of this organization, okay? This story is going downhill. Because I become the vice president, and about a month later, we have an officers meeting with our faculty advisor. And she starts talking about these huge plans that she has to spread Brazilian culture on campus. I mean, campus-wide events at Baylor. It's not a small university. And as soon as I realized what she was about to do, I quit. And that's why you don't let a freshman become your vice president. But the reason I quit was because I didn't want the Brazilian Student Association to grow. I wanted to keep it my thing. I wanted to keep it for myself, keep it comfortable. And that's okay. We all need those places. We need our places of retreat. We need those things that we keep for ourselves. The problem is when we want to do that with the love of God. The problem is when we start to think about the love of God, like I thought about that group, as something that you can keep for yourself. The problem is when you start thinking about church as a place that you come to get that something, you receive it, and then you go encouraged on your week. Don't get me wrong. I hope that you are feeling encouraged when you come here to church. But I hope it doesn't stop there. Because the love of God is not something that we can keep for ourselves. The love of God is something that we receive, nurture, and keep growing. And that's what our passage for tonight is all about. Tonight we are in Hebrews chapter 13, verses 1 through 3. And this passage is encouraging, inviting, calling us to keep love growing. Again, it's Hebrews 13, verses 1 through 3. Let brotherly love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels without knowing it. Remember those who are in prison as though in prison with them, and those who are being tortured as if you were being tortured with them. This short passage begins with an even shorter sentence. Let brotherly love remain. Now, not all translations say brotherly love. Some will say mutual love. Some will say the love among Christians. But the Greek word that's here is Philadelphia, and if you want to get a trivia question today, Philadelphia is the city of brotherly love. So what the author is saying here is, let brotherly love remain. And this word, Philadelphia, is the word that all of the New Testament authors use to describe the love among Christians. And I want to focus on this because we get so used to calling our fellow Christians brothers and sisters that perhaps we lose sight of how radical this is. Outside of the Bible, in the ancient world, you do not use this word, adelphoi, the word for brothers, for anything other than blood relatives. So when the biblical authors start using this word to refer to fellow Christians, they are doing something unique, something unforeseen. They are calling strangers to become family. They're calling you and me to become family. And the word stuck. To this day, we call each other brothers and sisters in church. If you come from a Hispanic church like I do in Waco, we say hermano, hermana. But do we really get what it means? Do we understand what it means to be family? Because family sticks together. Family spends time together in thick and thin. You know your family when you fight with your sister over dinner and make amends over some ice cream later on. And if you fought with someone over dinner, good news, there's ice cream later on. But that's the thing about families, right? Families keep working on the relationship. And we are family. So when we forget that, when we start to think of the church as something, some place that we come to get something instead of the family that we are in Christ, that's when the church suffers. When we forget that we are family in Christ, our brotherly love is threatened to be divided, perhaps along the party lines, perhaps even along the worship style lines. Doesn't matter. When we forget that we are family, we get divided because we can just go somewhere else. But that's not what the Bible calls us to do. The author of Hebrews says, let brotherly love continue. Persevere. Keep on working. Be a family. And I cannot think of a better place to do this than right here at Tallowood together, when we eat around the table like families do. And I hope that you take this opportunity as a springboard, as a starting point. Because just look around the people in you, perhaps a couple rows in front of you, a couple rows behind you. Find someone that you have never met before. Find someone that you have never had a meal, a coffee with. I saw some of you saying hi, introducing yourselves tonight. Great. Now invite someone over. Invite someone for coffee. Go make this your family. Keep love growing beyond family ties towards your church family. But even if we do that, even when we do that, we are not ready to stop yet, because love has to keep growing. Because the author of Hebrews knows that the danger of this brotherly love that we have here is for it to become exclusivist. You say, okay, I'm in. I'm going to treat this like a family. I'm not just going to come to church to get something. I'm going to participate in fellowship. But let's just keep this to ourselves, okay? You know, there are like 50, 60 of us right here. We're good here. We're good. And that's natural, because we want things to stay small. We want to keep it comfortable, cozy. And the author knows this so well that he phrases verses 1 and 2 very intentionally. If you were to translate that very literally, verses 1 and 2 would sound something like, let brotherly love continue, love of stranger do not forget. It's one of those sentences that sounds a little confusing, almost like something that Yoda would be saying, like, love of brother, let continue. Love of stranger, do not forget. But you realize what's going on here? He knows that we are bound to forget the love of stranger. So he's reminding us not to. Because loving strangers is hard. Let's agree. You know, loving the people that you see at least once a week, okay. At least you have a guarantee that, like, you know where they come every Sunday. But loving people that you've never seen before, my mom taught me not to even talk to strangers. The Bible is telling me to love them. And to help us overcome this fear, the author gives us a reason in the second part of verse 2. He says, by doing so, by receiving strangers, some have received angels without knowing it. Now, what's he talking about? Well, he's talking about the Old Testament, where we see several, it's not just one, but several stories of faithful followers of God receiving messengers from God without knowing it, receiving literal angels that would change their lives. It happened with Abraham, happened with Lot. Has it happened to you? Have you ever had an encounter with a stranger that changed your life? In 1937, Samuel Proctor, who would become a great African-American preacher, was still in high school when the black church that he was a member of caught on fire in the middle of the night and was completely destroyed. And one of the first people in the scene that night was the pastor of the white congregation of that neighborhood. And seeing the complete destruction of that building, that pastor invited the entire black congregation to worship in his building. 1937, segregated America. And that act of hospitality towards a high schooler, 17, 18-year-old, never left his mind. Because Proctor tells that gave him hope. That gave him hope that a different America was possible, that God had something different for this country. And with that hope, Proctor became a seminary professor. And as a seminary professor, he eventually got to mentor a young man who would eventually become the leader of the civil rights movement. So even if you have never heard of Samuel Proctor, you've heard his voice. Because a lot of the dream, a lot of the hope that you hear in Martin Luther King came from his mentor. A man who was once welcomed as a stranger by a white church in a segregated America. An encounter that changed his life and the lives of countless others forever. How can we receive the strangers that come to us, folks? How can we keep love growing beyond our brothers and sisters here towards all these strangers around us? You're in Houston. You have a lot of chances. How many strangers land in our city every single day? Is there someone in your neighborhood? In your office building? Someone who is looking to be welcomed? Someone looking for friends, for family, for a place to eat together? I think you know what to do. But if you want one more idea, remember we have a multicultural festival next month, so there's one more idea for you there. But the important thing is that we keep the love of God that we receive growing and growing and growing, and we are not ready to stop yet because our passage has yet one more challenge for us. In verse 3, he says, remember those who are in prison as though in prison with them, and those who are mistreated, since you are also mistreated with them. In a time when Christians were persecuted, unfairly imprisoned, this author is calling those same Christians to keep love growing towards the suffering people around them. We start here with our brothers and sisters. We receive the strangers that come to us, but we keep this love growing towards all of the suffering people around us. And if we just look around, there's so many people who can use our help. Our church is doing so many things to respond to that. You can sign up to make phone calls that can literally save people from human trafficking. You can learn how to minister in a disaster relief situation. You can help throw a block party to bring some joy to a neighborhood that needs it. I'm sure that Jeremy or anyone in our staff will be happy to connect with you about any of those opportunities. But the important thing is that we do something. Because in doing so, we are joining Christians. We're joining what Christians have done for thousands of years. And I mean thousands of years. In the 2nd and 3rd century, there were 2 pandemics. And if this was 3 years ago, I would have to explain to you what a pandemic is, but you know. There were 2 pandemics that killed a lot of people in the Roman Empire. And the gist of those diseases was that whatever it was, we don't know exactly what kind of virus it was, but whatever it was, if people received basic care, they would survive. People who just received food and water, they would survive. And yet, a lot of people died. You know why? Because no one wanted to care for them. Everyone left afraid of getting the sickness themselves. But then, some years ago, a Baylor sociologist, Rodney Stark, who just passed this summer, he was looking at the primary sources, the texts that you find about that time, the stories that you read about those plagues, and he found out that not everyone fled. Not everyone abandoned the sick. You see, the pagans fled, but the Christians scared. And one of those primary sources that Stark quotes in his book is Dionysius, the bishop of Alexandria at the time. And Dionysius says this sentence that stuck with me. Many Christians, in nurturing and caring for the sick, took their sicknesses upon themselves and died in their steads. Many Christians, in nurturing and caring for their sick, took their sicknesses upon themselves and died in their stead. Does that sound like someone you know? Does that sound like someone that you have heard of? I hope so, because those Christians were imitating Jesus Christ. Because Jesus Christ was the first one to teach us to keep love growing. Jesus Christ was the first one to call those disciples brothers and sisters. Jesus Christ was the first one to extend that love beyond the disciples to receive strangers, like that unclean woman who came from the middle of the crowd. And he not only healed, but stopped and listened to her. Jesus Christ was the first and the only one willing to keep that love growing beyond all of those people, to live an obedient, fully obedient life to the point of death and death on a cross, so that all the suffering sinners in this room, you, me, would have a chance to become children of God. That's the love that we are called to practice towards our brothers and sisters here, towards the strangers that come to us, towards all the suffering people around us. A love that keeps growing. That's the love of Jesus Christ. So let us do what we are called to do and follow him as we keep love growing. Would you pray with me? Jesus,